The Elder Scrolls, a universe so rich in history that many never even scratched the surface of it. Through thousands of years, Tamriel has hosted great battles, glorious empires, fearsome enemies, devastating tragedies, and legendary heroes. These are the stories of the events and people that have shaped Tamriel into what you see today. Today we will be talking about High King Emeric, leader of the Daggerfall Covenant. High King Emeric was the leader of the Daggerfall Covenant during the beginning years of the Interregnum in the Second Era. His story is wrought with bravery and valor, and is indeed the story of how the Daggerfall Covenant came to be. Emeric was born in the Second Era of 521 to Pierric of the Cumberland family of the Kingdom of Wayrest and High Rock. The Cumberlands were a prominent merchant family in Wayrest, where the mercantile community stood nearly equal ground with the crown. Emeric, like all children of the merchant families, was schooled in subjects such as tracking shipments, balancing accounts, and the fluctuations of currencies. But Tamriel was in a turbulent time, a time of warring nations and desperate grasp for power. It was because of the nature of the world that Pierric taught his son in the ways of warfare. Every morning Emeric would spar with the Cumberland Master of Arms, and he would train in horsemanship with the Menevia Heavy Dragoons. But this was not mere practice. During his summers, Emeric would travel as lieutenant for the mounted escort of the Evermore caravan, where he would fight off hill bandits, orcs, and Reachman warbands. His experience in combat later proved to be valuable when, in the Second Era of 541, when Dur-Corrac the Black Drake led the Reachmen of Druidoc Mountains in a campaign against the Breton kingdoms of High Rock. Swarming like ants, the Reachmen first took Baincorai, and then afterwards claimed Evermore in just 3 days, which had its people slaughtered and its lands razed. The people of Hellenstand held out longer, but were eventually overrun as well. Crossing the Vuelsay River, Dur-Corrac's Reachmen set upon Wayrest, but King Gardner had built new walls and battlements around the city to encompass the bursting population. These sturdy defenses were the refuge of many neighboring peoples and proved to be the saving grace of its inhabitants. Thus began the siege of Wayrest, where for 57 days the Dur-Corrac and his Reachmen assaulted the city, but to no avail. They had failed to bring siege engines to crumble the walls, nor had they ships to cut off the citadel's supply routes. Finding themselves at a stalemate, the Reach's army simply left for Glenumbra, where they proceeded to overtake Camlorn and set their eyes on Daggerfall. Emeric approached King Gardner and suggested they use his family's merchant ships to transport for the Menevia Heavy Dragoons. King Gardner liked the idea and placed Emeric at the lead of the lance-wielding horsemen. The Dragoons reached the Kingdom of Daggerfall by ship, where they made their ways to the Daggerfall city. The Black Drake's army massed in front of the city gates were taken completely by surprise when Emeric and the Heavy Dragoons charged them from the rear, decimating the Reachman forces. Emeric himself slew Dur-Corrac, tearing down his unholy banner. The Knights of the Daggerfall joined the fray, scattering the broken army like leaves in the wind. 2 weeks later, the first Daggerfall Covenant was signed between the kingdoms of Daggerfall, Camlorn, Shornhelm, Evermore, and Wayrest. Sometime later, the Cumberland family had a stroke of luck. They struck a vast load of orichalcum ore in the Cumberland mines. This fortune would elevate Cumberland House to the most powerful merchant family in Wayrest, second only to the royal Gardner family, the Crown Dynasty. Tragedy struck Wayrest when the entirety of the royal family was taken by the illness, including King Gardner. House Cumberland, now the most powerful family in Wayrest, was chosen to take the throne, but Wayrest's misfortune continued when the Cumberland's family's head, Emeric's father, Pierric, was also claimed by the plague. The next in line of succession, Emeric, was persuaded to assume the throne, although he was reluctant. When the day came in the Second Era of 563 for his coronation as King of Wayrest, a halo of gold appeared around the sun, signaling the approval of the divines. This omen dispelled Emeric's doubts and won over his rivals, turning them into trusting allies. Now that Emeric sat on the throne as King of Wayrest, the question of who would be his queen was in the mind of the people and his advisors. Princess Rael, daughter of King Rancer of Shornhelm, was offered to Emeric. King Rancer was persistent in his attempts to marry his daughter to Emeric, and Emeric had nearly decided to wed Rael when he made a trip to Sentinel and Hammerfell. There he beheld Princess Maria, daughter of King Faharajad. It was then he decided he would have no other queen but her. As an unexpected surprise, Maria bought a trade agreement between their two states, resulting in prosperity for all. However, King Rancer was upset that King Emeric had not accepted the hand of his daughter, and withdrew his ambassador from the court of Wayrest. He was invited to the wedding of Emeric and Maria in the spring of 566, but instead he remained in Shornhelm, seething. Emeric would have paid more concern towards his scorned ally, but he was so preoccupied with his new bride and trade issues around the Ilac Bay that the kingdom of Shornhelm in the mountains seemed distant and irrelevant. The mistake almost cost him his throne. For more than a year, Rancer raised his army and hired mercenaries. In the last year of 566, he led his army south on a sudden strike. He had marched through Alcaire and Menevia before Wayrest had even heard of his approach. Emeric managed to bring together a local militia to stand between the gates and Shornhelm's advance guard, the Old Gate Lancers. If the Lancers broke through the militia and stormed the gate, Wayrest would fall within the hour. Luckily, Emeric appeared at the scene with his Cumberland Guard in tow. While Emeric's guard wore full armor, Emeric himself remained unarmored but carried with him the Aurichalk Scalpel, an enchanted broadsword. Seeing the fearsome Old Gate Lancers bearing down on Wayrest's militia, Emeric had his bannermen sound a charge. The Cumberland Guard swept into battle, the Aurichalk Scalpel flashing and humming like a blade in a sawmill. The Lancers, finding now that they faced armored veterans instead of panicky irregulars, were further faltered by a sudden thunderstorm. They were lashed by hail, their horses terrified from lightning, and faced the Aurichalk Scalpel which cleaved their necks and limbs. The Old Gate Lancers hesitated, and then finally broke and ran from the gates. When Rancer's main force arrived, the troops of Wayrest were sealed within its walls and its gates shut tight. However, Shornhelm's king was undeterred. He was crafty and prepared, unlike Dur Karok many years ago. He had brought siege engines with him, and once more Wayrest was under siege. It seemed certain that Wayrest would fall when troops from Hammerfell and Orsinium appeared to rescue the city. They decimated Rancer's forces from either side, distracting his army enough for Wayrest's knight to ride out from the collapsing gates and lay waste to Shornhelm's army. With Rancer defeated, the siege of Wayrest was lifted. This battle led to the creation of the second, or greater, Daggerfall Covenant, embracing the Red Guards of Hammerfell and the Orcs of Orsinium. The free people of northwest Tamriel vowed to stand together against all threats from within or without. This alliance was soon put to the test in the Second Era of 579, when King Emeric was discussing a treaty with Emperor Varen, the standing leader of Cyrodiil, when he mysteriously disappeared from the Imperial City, and Daedric forces led by Molag Bal took hold of Cyrodiil. The so-called Empress Clivia assumed the Ruby Throne. Cyrodiil was consumed by murder, chaos, and madness. However, High King Emeric, now leader of the Daggerfall Covenant, saw hope. It was clear to him now what the destiny of the Daggerfall Covenant was: to march on Cyrodiil, overthrow the false Empress, and restore the Empire of Tamriel. The true flames of the Empire of Man still burned in the heart of the Daggerfall Covenant, and it would restore peace and justice to the land at all costs. That is the story of High King Emeric, one person that stood out in the history of the Elder Scrolls universe. The Elder Scrolls universe is full of people who shaped Tamriel and pleased the divines. One man is known for conquering all of Tamriel and shaping history as we know it.